Welcome to this 2021 World Ocean Summit strategy session on how to achieve meaningful protection of at least 30% of the ocean by 2030. Now, more than ever, it is clear that a healthy planet and ocean are enabling conditions for our health, our economies, and biodiversity. There's growing momentum to protect and conserve at least 30% of the global ocean by 2030 and to ensure sustainability in the rest. To date, 72 countries have publicly expressed support for this vital target. But global ambition must be paired with action. 30 by 30 goal is achievable, but will require hard work, commitment, and resources. There are several areas where dedicated focus can yield important gains, and we will hear more about those today, such as that action is vital at both a national and a global scale, that there are immediate opportunities to protect the high seas, the leadership of indigenous peoples and local communities, and respect for their rights is absolutely essential. We must focus on protecting the right areas and ensure quality management of those areas. And that increased financing and improved access to existing financial mechanisms is critical. We're all looking forward to hearing our panelists' views on these topics. So with that, I'd like to turn to them and introduce them. First of all, we have Diva Amon. Diva is the director and marine biologist of SpeSeas. We also have Anupa Asokan. She's a marine scientist and a board member of Surfrider Foundation. And we have José-María Figueres, the chair and founder of Ocean Unite and the former president of Costa Rica. We also have with us today Maria Damanaki. She is principal advisor to the Paradise Foundation, as well as former EU Commissioner of Maritime Affairs and Fisheries. We have a great group of panelists today and looking forward to just an excellent and interesting discussion with all of them. So I'll start by asking a question of Diva. Diva, how can we best ensure that protection efforts deliver the intended benefits? You know, for you as a deep sea scientist who's authored a lot of scientific publications, can you share with us your perspective of why the 30 by 30 target's important and what considerations need to be addressed to ensure marine protections are effective?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Tom. Thank you. So I think, targets like 30 by 30 really matter because they increase ambition. And we've seen that this one, for instance, has already worked to a degree. Thankfully, since the adoption of CBD's Aichi targets nearly a decade ago, the area of ocean protected has more than doubled to 7.5%. But of course, we still have a long way to go. And we're also seeing that actually meeting the targets is only one part of the equation. While the global community has, as we said, taken these huge strides towards conservation, we know that not every protected area is created equally. And frequently, they lack key attributes that provide the most benefits. And if we're looking to maximize the benefits, such as to biodiversity and to people, then we really need that quality of protected areas to be top-notch. And so science has thus far shown that conservation can deliver benefits if certain things are prescribed to. So, for instance, with regard to marine protected areas, we know that they should be put in the right places. If they're larger and isolated, then that tends to be even better. We know they need to be well designed. We also know that they need to be adequately funded and effectively managed. And critically, for MPAs to deliver those benefits, we really need them to be fully or highly protected, from the seafloor all the way to the sea surface. The IUCN has said that if the primary objective is to protect biodiversity and to prevent further environmental degradation, then really industrial scale activities just shouldn't be occurring in that MPA. And that makes sense, of course. But a recent meta-analysis has shown that fully protected areas actually have huge benefits compared to those that are partially protected. So for instance, in this analysis, it showed that 343% more fish were seen in a fully protected area versus one that was partially protected. And then when they compared it to the adjacent unprotected area, that fully protected area had 670% more fish biomass. And that's like a staggering difference, right? But unfortunately, currently less than a third of global MPA coverage, so about 2.7% right now, meets that criteria of being fully protected. And so really, we're reminded daily that we need to be protecting more biodiversity. It's urgent right now, especially given the increasing concerns surrounding climate change. And that needs to be from shallow reefs to deep sea coral and sponge gardens to those that are in those ecosystems in the high seas. And really, it's about sustaining livelihoods as well as protecting biodiversity. We know that MPAs have the potential to have ecological benefits, but like increasing wildlife, but also to deliver benefits to communities, like economic ones through increased tourism revenue, through more resilient ecosystems to climate change and extreme weather events, to greater fish catches. But something else to note is that these conservation benefits really can only be achieved when the changes are implemented on the water. So it's not enough to just announce an MPA or to designate or implement an MPA, or designate an MPA. We need to make sure that they're properly implemented, and then we need to make sure that they're effectively managed. So if the intended benefit is protecting 30% of the ocean to safeguard biodiversity, to increase resilience, to ensure food security, and ultimately to benefit communities, then we know that marine protected areas, if that fall underneath that 30% target, must be well managed and must be fully or highly protected. And I think above all, we need to love those targets like 30 by 30, but also go beyond them. We need to continue to raise ambition and enhance the protections in national jurisdictions, in the high seas, and in the Arctic and the Antarctic. Because I think the experience of the last 10 years has really shown us that these global targets are effective in raising this ambition around the globe. And really now we're at a pretty pivotal time where we need to grab hold of these, opportunities still in front of us and act again and make that 30% target and potentially even go beyond it.
Thank you, Diva. That was a great start to this conversation, laying that out for all of us. And I'd like to turn next to Anupa. And Anupa, you're a wonderfully active voice on the importance of ocean conservation at a local and national and global scale. And can you tell us from your perspective, what is it that local communities how can they benefit from ocean conservation and management? And how can they be even greater proponents of the kind of goal we're talking about today?
Sure, thank you. I think there are two things that we need to consider here a little bit more thoughtfully. One is the ripple effects ocean conservation and management can have throughout local communities, not just the traditional users of the ocean. And also that vocal and engaged stakeholder groups don't necessarily speak for a community as a whole, right? I think we're stuck in this narrative where protecting nature is antithetical to its value as a resource, where protection is solely for science or an environmentalist agenda or maybe to the benefit of an indigenous community's way of life. And while I think those groups have traditionally been nature stewards and the voices advocating to preserve our environment, it's important to recognize that the value and the benefits of nature don't just serve a few. They serve the needs of quite literally everyone on our planet. So with respect to the ocean, and I'm about to recite a talking point that I'm sure everyone's heard at least 10 times this week, the ocean feeds us, it drives our weather patterns, it gives us oxygen and medicine. It literally makes our planet habitable. So as human impacts on climate are also changing conditions in the ocean, among other solutions, we have overwhelming proof that protected spaces and targets like 30 by 30, protecting 30% of the ocean by 2030, are going to be a key buffer in protecting life in the ocean to the benefit of everyone that relies on it. So to that end, as we look towards making 30 by 30 a reality, we also need to create a space for every stakeholder as we thoughtfully designate and manage these protected areas in the ocean. We need to recognize that it's often the groups that have been given the platform and the space in the past that feel the most comfortable and are the most vocal in speaking out again. So to meaningfully protect the ocean or any natural space or institute any, future policies for that matter, we need to acknowledge the nuances within user groups and seek out, recruit, and give credence to all of the relevant voices and make sure they're heard and that they're accounted for. To give a little context on where I'm coming from here, I've been a recreational fisherwoman my entire life and never feeling like I fit the typical demographic of, the fishermen, particularly here in the US. I never identified myself that way until recently. And the fishing industry groups here have forcefully been opposing 30 by 30, both at the state level here in California where I live and at the federal level in the US. So, I love to fish. I see the benefit of ocean protection. I'm enjoying the benefits, every day when I go out there on the ocean. There must be others in that situation. And I felt like it was time for me to share something or to say something and share the narrative of this other side of the fishing community. I think the most disheartening thing for me was both pieces of legislation, and I'm referring to a bill called AB 3030 here in California and the Ocean-Based Climate Solutions Act in the US, just for those of you that may be familiar, that's what I'm referring to. Both pieces of legislation had such inclusive and thoughtful language about engaging a diverse set of stakeholders in the designation process. And passing those bills didn't mean that fishermen would lose access to some arbitrary pieces of the ocean. Passing the bills meant they called for inclusive, stakeholder-driven processes to meaningfully designate and protect 30% of coastal waters. So what the opposition signaled to me was the fishing industry wasn't even open to a conversation about ocean protection for everyone's benefit, including their own, frankly. They weren't willing to look long-term. So ultimately, 30 by 30 has been imposed by executive order, both here in California by the governor and in US federal waters by President Biden. And I'm optimistic that those conversations will not just involve communities broadly, but also address the nuances within community groups as we look to implement 30 by 30 with any success. And then beyond that, I hope that the US will step up as an example by calling for the same target internationally at the Convention on Biological Diversity, as Diva mentioned. And I hope that the implementation of those global targets aren't necessarily led by the US and other large nations as users, but they take into account the true benefits to everyone on the planet.
Thank you, Anupa. That was great to hear your perspective on stakeholders and their inclusivity, and the fact that in many cases MPAs can be actually very helpful to fisheries, but then despite that, there's this discourse that can be out there at times that that's not the case. So thank you for all your efforts to pierce that argument as well. I'd like to turn to José-María. And José-María, you've been working a lot on issues regarding the high seas. And can you explain to us what is the relevance and importance of the high seas, or some call it the global ocean, to a 30 by 30 target for the world?
Thank you so much, Tom. And let me begin by thanking The Economist for convening this World Ocean Summit and continuing the conversation, broadening understanding with respect to the importance of the ocean. I very much appreciated Anupa's mentioning the many or some of the attributes and some of the positive effects that the ocean has on our lives and on the planet. Indeed, it is the most important ecosystem in our lives. And in these times that we're living in, Tom, when we have placed a renewed emphasis and importance on health, one can definitely say that with no healthy ocean, there is no healthy planet, and in fact, no life on Earth. And the challenge here is that the ocean is not in a healthy place. Because for decade after decade, we've not taken care of the ocean as we should have. Today, it suffers from acidification. It is absorbing 25% of global carbon emissions. It suffers from overfishing. It suffers from debris, 8 million tons of plastic going into the ocean every year. And so what we really are talking about here, and this is where the high seas comes in to your question, is we're talking about coming together as humanity to put a rescue package together for the ocean that will stop its decline and bring it back to a course of recovery. Now, as Diva was mentioning, the science is clear. It has been that way for many years, that there is nothing, in fact, that is more productive or better in terms of recovering the health ocean than marine protected areas. 30% is what scientists have told us we should put into marine protected areas, 30% of the surface of the ocean or of the ocean. And that is, in fact, what we have included in Sustainable Development Goal number 14, the ocean's Sustainable Development Goal, as an objective to be reached by 2030. We were supposed to be at 10% of the ocean in marine protected areas by 2020. We're far from that, and that means that we have to catch up in this decade that is absolutely so strategic to humanity in terms of lowering carbon emissions and getting the ocean back to health. So, in achieving 30%, there are three things I think to concentrate on. One is, of course, that countries have to do what they can within their territorial waters in living up to the 30% pledge. And I'm glad you mentioned, Tom, that there are already 72 countries that have adhered to doing so in the years that we have ahead. But nations doing that is not enough. And so we need to declare marine protected areas in the high seas. Now, the high seas are 66% of the ocean's surface. The economic activity that is going on today in the high seas is only possible because the countries subsidize their fishing fleets or activities in the high seas at a very large societal cost. And so it makes no sense to have these activities in the high seas when Diva has shared with us the extraordinary amounts of additional biodiversity and fish stock that we could derive from marine protected areas, especially if they are well protected, as she mentioned, in the high seas. And there we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity coming up in the negotiations that are now currently taking place at the United Nations. Because we have been in discussion, it seems forever, but for many years, of the third implementing agreement under UNCLOS, the BBNJ negotiations, the biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction. And we need to make sure that between now and August, when this is supposedly going to be finalized, we elevate that conversation to be able to achieve a high quality implementing agreement, not the least or lowest common denominator, a high quality implementing agreement. That is going to stay with us for decades. And so what we do now as citizens and mainly as countries in supporting the higher level ambition of those negotiations is going to have a huge effect in the decades to come. So nations have to do what they can do within their territorial waters. We all have to come together to elevate the ambition of the BBNJ negotiations at the United Nations. And I believe that we also have an opportunity on areas that were already mentioned here by Diva, the Arctic and specifically the Antarctic. So there are 3 marine protected areas around the Antarctic, which are the East Antarctic, the Weddell Sea, and the Antarctic Peninsula marine protected areas that are ready to be approved by CAMLAR. CAMLAR, the governing body of nations that has under its tutelage the Antarctic continent. Life on the Antarctica is not on the continent, it is in the ocean around Antarctica. That is where the biodiversity is. That is where the plankton is produced, that then through ocean currents goes to feed the biodiversity in the oceans of the world. And protecting these areas is of absolute importance. So when CAMLAR comes together next October or November in Hubbard, Australia, they have the opportunity to declare these 3 marine protected areas for a total area of almost 4 million square kilometers. That would be the most important, largest ever act of conservation by humanity. Think of that. Think of the opportunity. This is a year to be much more ambitious. To be ambitious with BB&J negotiations at the United Nations, to be ambitious at CAMLAR with respect to what we can do in terms of marine protected areas around Antarctica, and to set a new course for the ocean to recover and for life on the planet to have a greater opportunity.
Thank you, José-María, for those inspiring words and all the detail about what does need to happen in the high seas, the opportunities that are out there. And Maria, just considering that the nations of the world, or at least 72 of them at this point, are setting a much more ambitious conservation target for the oceans. And José-María was just explaining why there are some near-term opportunities and the importance of that. Can you tell us more about sort of the costs and benefits of such an ambitious conservation agenda, and how can we secure a healthy ocean? Is there the funding out there? How might the needed resources actually arise?
Well, I have heard so great arguments. I would like to thank all the people here for bringing them on our plates. So now I'm going to take over the practical aspect of all this. And I would like to say, Tom, that as you said from the very first beginning, we need science, we have it. We need campaign, we have it. We need vision, we have it. Then we need resources. And I have to say that the resources given to the ocean for the moment are not enough, are not adequate to the ambition we all have around this table. We have some achievements, great achievements, and I would like to thank here some big foundations who have given a lot of money to this great cause, some governments who are very willing to move forward. I can mention European Union because I have a personal experience that they are pushing on high seas and in other fronts, and other countries, the big ocean states, I mean the small island states around the world. All these, we have these, how can I say, forces of good. But then this is a very expensive exercise if we want not only to have just marine protected areas, but as Diva said, well planned and managed. We need resources, and the resources are not enough. I think that I have to underline that we have the leverage. This is the idea, my central idea. We have the leverage, the money, which is coming from foundations and governments, the public money. And in order to do that, we have to bring markets in the game, corporates in the game. What I mean here, I mean that we have to persuade them to take the risk and invest in the areas around the marine protected areas. A marine protected area, as Diva and Anupa mentioned, is very lucrative. All the natural resources are thriving there. But the area around the marine protected area can be very profitable for local communities, for the people, for the industry in general. So the idea is that if we are going with a good plan, then we can take advantage of the area that surrounds the marine protected area. And then we have some very, very good example of leveraging the money that the foundations are and the public money is bringing in. For example, we have innovative financial instruments like, for example, fees from ecotourism. In Indonesia, in Maldives, in Fiji, I have seen a lot of cases where the local communities and the hotel owners are taking advantage of a marine protected area with ecotourism. There are other ideas, for example, blue bonds and debt for conservation swaps, or blue bonds for fisheries and other resources, or new insurance products happening in Mexico right now. They have secured their coastline, working with the Hotel Owners Association and the industry, the insurance industry, to restore all the mangroves and the corals across the coastline. So we can use these innovative financial tools to attract more investment for the ocean. To make a long story short, Tom, we have to de-risk the investment, the sustainable investment for ocean. And we have to persuade people that profits can come back, because they can come back in long term. Perhaps for a short period of time, we have to close fisheries here, for example, but in long term, the fishermen will take the advantage of it. So this is the general idea, and we can work all together to bring more money to the ocean conservation, because we really need that. And I can say here that we have a lot of governments who are also trying to do this broader management. For example, just to mention one initiative, I have been recently chairing the advisory network for a high-level panel. 14 prime ministers around the world, they are gathered together with the Friends of Oceans Action and others. And what we are trying to do is to finance conservation through a sustainably managed and designed plan for the whole exclusive economic zone of a country. And this can give back profits and can really be for the health of both planet, ocean, and people. So I can follow up on what Maria Jose said recently, that through the pandemic, a lot of people, I can say millions of people around the world, are rethinking about their ways of life, their choices about food, about traveling, about everything. So now we have the momentum to persuade them that the health of the ocean is connected with their health and their profits, and we can keep both ocean and people happy. This will not be easy, but I believe that we have the great team in the room, and we have a lot of people who can help us. And also, this will be my last point, we have to bring some big global players in the game. We are discussing about a high seas treaty or Antarctica. You know, José-María and everybody knows that we cannot do that without China or Russia. I have been working with the Paradise Foundation in China now as their principal advisor. And you know, there is a progress in China. Not enough, but there is a progress. And marine protection now is taking more momentum, because the Chinese government, they have decided to have a fully transformation about their marine legislation until 2025, and a full network of marine protected areas until 2035. It's not soon enough, and we have to speed up. And the Paradise Foundation now is planning, let's say in the next year, 2021, to have the first big marine protected area managed by a foundation in China. We're working now in the Bay Area the big area between Canton, Macau, and Hong Kong to create something there. In China, everything is very big, and I'm really excited about it. But let's see. You know that the next biodiversity convention that you already referred to is happening in Kunming, in China. So now we have the opportunity to persuade the Chinese government, they are looking for their plans to have a strong commitment around it. It's really now the time for China and Russia to come in, and we have to do our best to persuade them to do so.
Thank you, Maria. It was great to hear about your work on the high-level panel, your thoughts about de-risking investment into the ocean, what you're doing with the Paradise Foundation in China. Before I move on, though, José-María, it looks like you'd like to comment.
Thank you, Tom. I wanted to comment on something that Maria just mentioned when she talked about bringing more investment into the ocean space. And in very recent years that we have begun to talk about the blue economy. We were already becoming used to think about the green economy. It's only in recent times that we're now talking about the blue economy, which is a fantastic contributor to global GDP. But the point I want to get to is what Maria mentioned in terms of de-risking the investment. If you strip out the risk of any possible investment, you get capital flow coming into those areas in which you want them to participate much more actively. And I think that in that sense, the work that ORA is doing, the Ocean Risk and Resilience Alliance, is absolutely fantastic. By bringing together many stakeholders from different sectors, really led in the beginning by the insurance companies that were looking at the tremendous amount of exposure that they have to what can happen in the ocean if we don't get it back to health and we don't control climate change. And so stripping what this multi-stakeholder platform is doing, this initiative, is stripping risk out of investment into the ocean space. It goes hand in hand with what Maria was mentioning, which I think is fundamentally important in terms of capturing the entire economic value of the ocean, creating all the jobs that we can create in it and the opportunities of well-being without, of course, putting its risk its good health.
Thank you, José-María, for adding some additional important information on de-risking and an example of what you're seeing already happening with insurance and reinsurance companies. And we're talking a lot about the value of the ocean. And José-María, when you're talking about the high seas, you mentioned that subsidies distort the value of fisheries often in the high seas. And Diva, you're one of the few people in the world who really knows the deep sea. And can you tell us a bit about why is it worth protecting, and what have you seen, and what do you know about how it can be a part of this blue economy and the larger need we have to secure humanity on this planet? What is the relevance of the deep seas?
Gosh, so I'm not sure where to begin, but I guess it's as a deep sea scientist, I feel very privileged to have seen things, whether it's species, habitats, behaviors that no one on the planet has seen before. That's been an incredible privilege, and really, it's allowed me to see this huge diversity of habitats as well as species that exist in the deep ocean. And of course, most of the high seas is deep ocean as well, so in the high seas. And really, this diversity has lent itself to these huge functions that the ocean plays, as we heard from Anupa and José-María and Maria earlier, that really our ocean and our deep ocean has so much value and is so important to our well-being and to us being here. We know that it plays a role in our climate, in cycling nutrients, and providing resources. And the deep ocean potentially has even more benefits that could come from it, such as marine genetic resources that could be used in medical advances in the future. Really, this is a huge untapped resource. And then, of course, I think something we often underestimate with the deep ocean is that cultural value, its ability to educate, its ability to inspire, really that sense of well-being that we get from being good stewards of it. Really, there's a lot there that it's almost hard to assign an economic value to. But of course, it still means that it's really important. And I think, for most of those things, it's really important to know that we don't understand how most of those things work. We have explored so little of the deep ocean, despite the fact that it is 95% of all the space on the planet for life, all the habitable space. Yet it's been extremely poorly explored. Less than 1% of it has been explored. So really, there is this huge untapped reservoir of resources that we could be missing out on. And I say missing out on because really, there's not a lot of protection for deep ocean environments. We risk losing species, we risk losing habitats, we risk losing ecosystem services before we know, understand, and value them. And really, that's a problem. Through a lot of the exploration and some research that I've done, yes, there have been all these amazing sites. But as with the good experiences, there are also bad ones. Just because the high seas and the deep seas are far from our shores and largely overlooked compared to shallow coastal waters, I guess you could say out of sight, out of mind, it doesn't mean that they are out of our reach. And on every single research cruise that I've been on, from Antarctica to the Mariana Trench, we see evidence of us, whether it's pollution, trash, trawl scars from fishing nets, and that's even if we haven't been there before. So really, this is a growing problem. And as we just heard from José-María, with this rise of the blue economy and climate change, there is a lot to be concerned about. So I guess it's that, we cannot safeguard our oceans for future generations if we do not consider the majority of the ocean. And the majority of them lie down in the depths and way beyond our borders. So really, the deep sea must be part of the solution going forward.
Thank you, Diva. Thanks for connecting us with the deep sea. And I think we all envy the experiences you've had to be down there in the depths. And clearly, it may be far away, but it is essential to our survival to ensure its health. I'd like to turn to Anupa for a moment and ask, Anupa, you're on the board of Surfrider Foundation, which is one of the preeminent nonprofit NGOs in the United States that works with local communities and galvanizes communities on ocean-related issues. Can you tell us a bit about how you think those activities connect into this call for a much greater protection of 30% of the ocean? And are there lessons that can be learned from Surfrider, for instance, for other countries and people that may be listening to this conversation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the power of Surfrider is the grassroots activism, right? You're tapping into a recreational ocean user group that, similar to Diva, who gets to experience the open ocean and the deep sea and recognize the value and the cool things that are there, and also witness the change and the impact that we've had. When you turn to people who surf every morning or perhaps fish every weekend or whenever time allows, you are similarly putting yourself in a space where you're recognizing the changes that we've had on our planet and how things are potentially changing beyond our control. I think surfers, fishers, other divers, other ocean recreators are generally the best stewards we have of our environment and the ocean in particular. For me personally, my first connection to the ocean as a young child was actually through fishing. And that's what inspired me to take on ocean conservation as a career. And surfers might be at the surface of the ocean and not necessarily always seeing what lies beneath. But I think it's been really great through organizations like Surfrider to kind of give that avenue. They're experiencing issues with water quality, right? They're the ones getting sick if there's a water quality issue. And using that as the driving force to help this community on the front lines kind of speak out and be advocates for that protected space. I think I answered your question.
Thank you, Anupa. That was great and very inspiring too. I'd like to just turn back to José-María for a moment and ask, you've had this unique perspective, or certainly unique among this group, of being the head of state of a country. And it is both local communities who are vitally important to ensuring the health of the global ocean, as we were just talking about, and it is also decisions that will be made at the highest levels of government. And can you tell us from your perspective, having run a country, what are the issues that would be grappled with trying to make a decision of whether to join in, whether a country should join in on this call for 30%? And what are the challenges, and what would you say to the leaders who haven't yet? Only 72 countries have signed on. That's not a majority of the world yet.
Well, Tom, I think I would say two things. First of all, I would say that it can be done, both at the national and international level. Look at Chile. Chile has already set aside in marine protected areas between 41 and 42% of its territorial waters. Now, some may argue that we have to increase the quality of some of those MPAs, and Diva was very specific as to the many ways of increasing quality of MPAs. But the fact that they have already declared 42% of their territorial waters as a marine protected area, I find that it is absolutely outstanding, amazing, an example for nations to follow. Secondly, or within the same point of it can be done, it can also be done at the international level. Back in 2016, CAMLAR came together and declared the largest marine protected area ever in the Antarctic and around the world, the Ross Sea, 1.5 million square kilometers. So it can be done, yes, at the national level and at the international level. It requires leadership, it requires vision, it requires understanding the role the ocean plays as the most important system on the planet and in our lives. And the second element that I would converse about with global leaders would be to think big, soñar en grande, we would say in Spanish. Dream big. Be much more ambitious than we have been so far. We're negotiating the BBNJ agreement for the high seas in United Nations. Why not close off 100% of the high seas as a marine protected area? That's 66% of the surface of the ocean. Do it. It's not only an environmental or economic issue, as we heard from Diva, in terms of the multiplication of fish stock that derive from the benefits of a marine protected area. It is also an issue of equity amongst nations. You have less than 10 or 12 nations around the world that are fishing in the high seas, only because of the subsidies that those governments give the fishing industries. It's less than 1% of total employment in the fishing industry. It is less than 10% of the catch. And yet it is in the detriment of 144 nations that have economic zones in their coasts, on their coasts, from which millions of people derive their livelihoods. So be ambitious. Let's close off the high seas as one big marine protected area and reap the ecological but also economic benefits of that. And let's be ambitious when it comes to the Antarctic as well. I mentioned the creation of the Ross Sea MPA back in 2016. 1.5 square million kilometers. I mentioned the 3 MPAs that are up for being created this year, 4 million square kilometers. What about if we just declare the entire ocean around Antarctica a marine protected area? And with that, we increase the resilience of the continent to climate change. Why do we have to continue to fish krill in those waters that play such a fundamentally important role in the food chain and in fixing carbon, so that we can have some omega pills every morning when we wake up, when we could substitute those omega pills with vegetable produced omega and create livelihoods for farmers around the world? We need to be more ambitious, Tom. We need to get with it. We need to understand the importance of the ocean, the opportunity that we have in our livelihoods, and the responsibility that we also have with that opportunity of being good stewards of the ocean and of the environment.
Thank you, José-María.
Hear, hear.
You're again reinforcing your
Very
points on
inspiring
ambition. It is clear how you were voted in as a head of state in terms of someone with vision, for sure. And so thank you for sharing that with everybody today. Maria, you're involved in discussions that very few others are, whether it be from when you were the EU Commissioner of Maritime and Affairs and Fisheries, or your current engagement on the high-level panel for oceans. And can you tell us a little bit more about how the kind of ambitious ocean conservation agenda fits into some of the global discussions you're involved with, and what other policies are needed in addition to countries making commitments about marine protection? What are the other really critical policy areas that are absolutely needed for 30% and for a healthy ocean?
I think that after José-María and the ambitious plan he presented, everything will seem a little bit, how can I say, miserable. I would like to say that we needed to see all the perspectives together. And we can be efficient and sufficient if we can prove, if we can connect in a good way the health of the ocean with the health of the planet. This is much more easier. We have great science here, but also the health and prosperity of the people. Because people, after all, the citizens we are taking care about as leaders or as politicians or as whatever, they would like to have a good quality of life. So we have to try to connect this quality of life and the new way of life with the health of ocean. We have some successes here. José-María mentioned Antarctica Ross Sea. I have spent 5 years in Brussels trying to persuade other countries to go for that. I have seen that from inside, because it's not easy for all these nations who are fishing there just to say goodbye one day, because they have interests, national interests, that in their opinion, they are good to be protected. I think, Tom, to answer more directly to your question, I can bring 2 ideas here. First, we have not only to be ambitious, yes, we have to be ambitious, but also we have to avoid short-termism. We have to persuade the leaders to think in long term, to see what is going to happen after 10 years. If we close an area, what can be the impact after 10 years? Who is going to get the profits? And then we have to give, this is my dream. José-María explained his dream. I'm going to explain mine. My dream is to give nature a value. Nature has a value. Natural capital is there. If I'm going to fish recreationally, to come to what was, I have heard a very, very important and very beautiful description from Anupa about recreational fishery. If I'm going there to catch a fish, this is common good. This has a value. It has to have a value that is given then to our citizens. So my dream is to give nature a value. If I'm going to a coastal area and I can see corals, the coral reefs have a value. I have to give them a value. So if I am an investor and I'm going to invest, I have to take the common good and pay for the value of it. This will be a change in economics that a lot of scientists are discussing right now, and can change the whole world around it. Also, one last point, I think we have to present the ocean not as a victim anymore. Ocean is very big. I'm coming from Greece. You know, Poseidon was grown up here. So I can say to you that ocean is very big, too big, too big. So ocean is not a victim. Ocean is a solution. Ocean can solve 20% of our climate change problem. A healthy ocean can limit down the CO2 emissions to 1/5. A healthy ocean can give back $6 to $1 we invest. A healthy ocean can give us 6 times more seafood if we are going for sustainable aquaculture of bivalves and seaweed. We can have solutions, and ocean is a solution. We have to present ocean as a big, 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 big lung of the planet. And every second breath we take is coming from the ocean. So this is all about. So I think that what we need, Tom, is, how can I say, something that can bring together science, plans, ambition, vision, resources, and an idea about how we can take the natural capital and make it the capital of our life. And at one point, I think the post-COVID era is an opportunity for that. Post-COVID era is coming, and there is an opportunity to think about that in this new way.
It is wonderful to hear your vision too, Maria. And Anupa would like to comment on this, and then José-María. Anupa?
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree with everything everyone is saying here, but if I can just provide some more context as to the landscape of the world that we're working in here when we're trying to protect the ocean, it's a big shift in mindset to think of the ocean for its value as it exists, rather than to think of it as a resource to exploit, right? And I think part of the reason for that mentality is the fact that in the fishing industry in particular, we've approached, let me put it this way, in the US in particular, I sound like such an American, I'm sorry. Our fisheries here are relatively and arguably well managed. But policies address how many we can take, when we can take them, and how big that they can be, right? So if we reduce catch limits or if we reduce fishable areas, that immediately results in a hit to a bottom line. And that's what's driven these policy conversations for so long. So I understand that approach, and that definitely has spurred the recovery of like a number of target species around the world. But our reality is what's changing. There are way more impacts on the system now beyond our control with climate change. So by protecting habitat for fisheries, it gives them a chance to adapt to those changing conditions and avoid complete collapse from some disaster event, and ultimately continue to exist into the future. So we have the proof that it works. We've learned the most effective ways to do it, and ocean users are already enjoying those benefits. But that's not going to be enough moving forward. So I think the last several years, as everyone's mentioned here, like we've had intense drought, we've had floods, we've had hurricanes. And if that's taught us anything is, MPAs have been described as this insurance policy for the ocean. Marine protected areas are an insurance policy for the ocean. And that kind of speaks to its value a little bit more. We're starting to have those kinds of conversations. So a network of science-based and user-driven protected areas are that insurance policy for the future of biodiversity on our planet and to protect the value of the ocean.
Thank you, Anupa. I'd like to, Diva wanted to comment on this as well, so I'd like to turn to her. And then, José-María, you're going to have the last word because we will have used up the full 60 minutes. So
And we
Diva?
and we all know his
Sure.
last word is going to be incredibly inspiring, and just leave us all of our hearts full. But I mean, like Anupa, I agree with everything that everyone is saying, and so much of it is resonating, and it fills me with so much joy. But really, José-Maria's dreams, yes, absolutely. If I could shout that from the rafters, completely. A lot of what Maria is suggesting as well, yes, and I completely agree with Anupa in that. There are issues with putting values on things just because it is difficult, and there are a lot of for instance, ecosystem services like cultural value, for instance, that how do you even begin to do that? There are a lot of values that aren't economic, and so that's really important that we account for those in a way that really does account for their full value. But I guess I just wanted to add that coming back to this 30 by 30 target is that, sure, if we, as Maria mentioned, it's hard to convince countries to take these actions. And if we can't achieve something like what José-María is suggesting, then, and we still are left with this 30% by 2030 vision, then I think it's important not to neglect that other 70%. Just because 30% of the ocean is highly or fully protected, it doesn't mean that the other 70% shouldn't be sustainably managed. Like, it's not just a free-for-all in that part of the ocean. And really, that's the kind of mindset that we need to have going forward in order for us to be able to steward our ocean effectively in the future.
Thanks for bringing us back to the full ocean, Diva, there. And this has been a really wonderful discussion with all of you about this momentum and drive to protect 30% of the ocean, but it is in the context of the full ocean becoming healthier. And, to drive us home on this and to give the last word, I'd like to turn to José-María.
Thank you, Tom. Let me start off perhaps by saying that every one of us here, Diva, Anupa, Maria, Tom, myself, have spoken not only to the environmental imperatives of protecting the ocean, we have also spoken to the scientific basis upon which we are arguing our positions, and we have spoken to the economic benefits of bringing the ocean back to health. In that respect, I would say that words are more powerful than ever. I loved what Maria said about the ocean being a solution. I loved the way that Anupa talked about the responsibility of the fishing industry, and the way that Diva just said, yes, even if we protect the entire high seas, don't forget about the rest of the ocean. It is a positive, inspiring language that brings us back to reality. We have a tremendous opportunity here as we search for ways in which to come out of this global crisis. It cannot be to come back to what some people call a normal. It must be to come back to something much better, something that guarantees us that we will be another generation to leave a better world for our children, and the last generation to have inherited a world which was much better than the one that we're passing on. We have opportunity. We can come together. We can work these issues out. We have the economic wherewithal. We have the science behind us. We have the technology. What we need is our personal aspiration to think generously about the planet and about livelihood and well-being for all on this planet. Thank you all here, and thanks to our audience. I think we all want to thank our audience for sharing with us on this panel, and thank you, Tom, for such a masterful, well-done panel.
Thanks to all of you. It was wonderful to be with you. And thanks to The Economist for this great platform, the Ocean Summit, for have this Just really important discussion.